session around water-sensitive urban management, challenges and practices at Connect Karo 2023. I'm Sahana Goswami with WRI India. I'll do a quick round of introduction and a little bit about the format of this session. And then, of course, I'll call on our really distinguished guest, Rajiv Ranjan Sir, to give a few opening remarks to set the context. So the intention of this session is to have a very focused sort of working group format discussion around the challenges that we face in cities and how we can look at water sensitive practices to move towards more resilient pathways. The intention of this comes from the fact that a lot of our planning endeavors are really about the future of cities, but we already have well-established cities which are struggling with a lot of issues, and Delhi being case in point over the past few days. Given that context, I'll now move on to introducing all our esteemed guests. We have Shri Rajiv Ranjan Mishra sir, who's a Chief Technical Advisor at NIUA now. Sir has had a long distinguished career and formerly was the Director General at National Mission of Clean Ganga, and has led a significant amount of work and improvements along the Ganga basin across a range of river management and urban issues. Welcome, sir. Thank you for joining us at this session. We also have with us Dr. Chandrani Bandopadhyay, who's an associate professor at the School of Planning and Architecture at Delhi. She also brings a large background and experience in urban planning and also around disaster management. We also have with us Dipinder Kapoor, who is the director for the water program at Center for Science and Environment. Also, Dipinder sir with, again, a very distinguished background working in the urban water sector for many years. Also with us is Pratima Marwa. She is the Deputy General Manager for Landscape and Architecture with Tata Consulting Engineers. Pratima ma'am has worked extensively on riverfront developments across the Ganga basin. I won't go into a long introduction because we have so many people and we really want to get to the discussion, but that's a lot of experience of on-ground project work that she brings. Also with us, Dr. Harry Veeraswamy of Alluvium International from Australia. Needless to say, Alluvium also has an extensive portfolio of work that they have been doing around water sensitive, not just urban, but much more regional focused work. To round off, we have Nidhi Madan from Beyond Built. She's a landscape architect with the organization Beyond Built and also other consulting work that she does. Again, a lot of experience, almost 15 years of detailed on-ground projects, not just around urban planning and ecological works, but also around accessibility and looking at a lot of how design interventions can feed into improving our cities. And Manushi Jain from Sponge Collaborative, director there, who's sort of leading, and I cannot say enough interesting things about Sponge Collaborative, the really sort of interesting work they are doing to look at how we can embed resilience measures into urban planning. Also joining us shortly will be Olga Choplyanska, who's founding director at Unicity, who brings again a lot of experience around working around the South Asian cities region, looking at city improvements. She's a bit delayed, but we will also have her join us for the rest of this session. Having given this very brief introduction, welcome all again. Thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand over to Rajiv Ranjan sir to give us a few minutes of opening remarks so that we can set the context and stage. So over to you, sir.
First of all, let me thank WRI and Samrat for inviting me, because not only we will deliberate on a very serious and very important subject, it's also a chance for me to meet some of the old colleagues and with whom we have worked and even now working. It's very important to perhaps the timing is also very relevant. All Delhi, if you see last few days, everyone is talking on this topic, isn't it? I mean, all kinds of analysis, editorials. We keep on reviewing that we have not learned from past. This is happening, that is happening. The flood has come, urban flood has come. And Delhi is not an exception. I think last year we were talking about Bangalore, urban floods. We talked about Chennai. So I think all cities, all the places we have been going through such kind of issues. Uh, if you look at water sensitive urban management, I think this word sensitive is very important. Not that we have lack of knowledge. I think if you look at each individual, each branch of knowledge, I think we have experts. But all those expertise, are we really sensitive to what we are doing and sensitive towards water, towards rivers? I think I will talk about river more now and then. But please forget me when I say river, I include the whole ecosystem in river. It's not the river which you see flowing from point A to point B, carrying a quantity of water. Along with water, it carries sediment, several things. But basically, when we started looking at these practices, I think some of you bear with me. I think CSC has been a part of lots of our work, and Samrat has been there with us. Pratima has been there. I think we tried to look at the whole ecosystem. But the thing is, when you look at urban management, the urban manager, how typically is our present urban manager? So I think we will deliberate again lot of very nice and very thoughtful things. But I think somewhere we have to also look at who is our urban manager. Not some cities, of course, the study which WRI has done is basically some big cities, large cities. You have much better urban manager, much well equipped urban manager. But I think somewhere down the line, as a result of today's deliberation, we have to also think of tier 2 cities. Because why it's very important, right in the beginning I am telling, because we still have lot of opportunity. Still there is not so much of complicated situation has happened, so I think there is still a lot to do there, though the study is more on the larger cities. But if we have to draw some lessons, if we have to go to those cities, if we have to give them some guidelines, I think what exactly we can do, how we can actually be also useful to them. Because why I am very particular, because your study is talking about core of the city and peripheral of the city. You are talking about peri-urban areas, in between area, 10 kilometer, then larger area. I think very nice maps are there in your study showing how things have changed. That's the beauty, that's the power of the technology. Now, if you go with this and talk to the urban system, perhaps they will be in a better position to listen to you or become sensitive. So the challenge before all of us, assuming that we all understand it and we are all on the same page, we all have the same priority for being water and urban managers, good, where the natural resources also are not neglected. The challenge is how to convince others. And those others are very important, more important than us, because they are the doers. They make or break what we are talking here. So I think that becomes very important thing for us. Uh, First of all, I think I'm very happy that you have come up with this study, because throughout my tenure in NMCG and even in urban developments, various places, when we deal with the political leadership, when you deal with the other stakeholders, don't always think political leadership is the only challenge. You are talking to shipping ministry, you are talking to other ministry, someone power ministry. I think when you are talking to the other ministries, their perspective is absolutely very different. They may not be so sensitive to the ecosystem, they may not have the same kind of value which perhaps we have got being a river manager. So I think that becomes very important, that you have a study of this type. I think you have very rightly pointed out the valuation of natural resources. Often we don't have that. I think when we deal with the power hydroelectric projects coming up in the Himalayan area, I think we always have a number about, if you don't have this power plant, how much is your loss. But if you have too many of them beyond the carrying capacity of the river, what is the loss in terms of number, in terms of value? Perhaps we don't have that. So I think that's something which we will move one step closer with these kind of studies coming up. Uh, Keeping these things in mind, we actually thought of starting a kind of, I think Samrat is aware, many of you will be aware about a kind of new discipline or new way of talking, managing urban rivers. Again, catch is river means water body, river means floodplain, river means all those things. I mean, so when I say river, don't think river. We are looking at the entire water management. So we started looking at that, and been in NIU as a partner, we started trying to develop something like a, and see, it's nice to talk, it's nice to jolt the people with these kind of studies, but I think it's very important to go into little deeper and also help these urban managers with certain some tools and templates. because without that he won't know where to go. I mean, you may have the municipal stakeholders or state stakeholders, they may agree with you, but they won't know how to exactly implement it, these ideas. So I think this the idea of urban river management plan which we tried to develop is looking at a kind of giving them an idea to look at all those things holistically. That's again like uh, Dr. Harry is here. Australia is a pioneer, and there's a lot of work which has happened about water sensitive urban design. I think under this U20, I had a chance to have a long conversation with Mr. Tony Wong, who has been doing a lot of work on that, and we were together for 2 days. That was a very nice thing. So I think that's their sponsity. I think we have a spons collaborative as a part of this thing. Chennai is trying to do it. So I think all those things are there. These are all framework, these are all best practices. URMP is a much more little more clear framework where you also try to do. Depinder is here, water sensitive urban design, one project of NMCG he is also implementing. So he is talking about all water one, and then today also someone has written that so much of flood in Delhi have been not lost so much of water. I mean, people were all very keen to get rid of this water as much as possible, as early as possible. But yes, I think, are we prepared to take some advantage of this water? And some of this water will keep on coming. Now, I think I remember some German minister was here, I think about a month back. And one of the technical officer was, I think, some German team, they were showing that mark, that railway bridge there, saying that this 205, 206, and then 78 mark, and saying that this will never be breached. But now we have got 1 meter, more than a meter higher than that historical benchmark. So I think these things will keep on happening. I am also like to share with you, there is a lot of good work with the help of NGT on Yamuna floodplains, because they regulated the construction activities. So there is a principal committee set up by NGT, which is chaired by Secretary Water Resources, Ministry of Jal Shakti, and I used to be the convener of that committee, being DG. And there are some excellent experts. Professor C.K. Babu, I will very clearly name, because every time we used to have that meeting, every time some infrastructure project proponent department is to come and say that already so much has been constructed, we will construct one more building there, and water will never come here. And Professor C.K. Babu used to say, ki, this is active floodplain, water will come someday. But everyone used to laugh at him, laugh at us actually, because we used to support him and we used to negate a lot of, I mean, between your sister departments, a lot of problems happen, because they say that these people are becoming not a kind of against development, or they are just trying to say no to all the projects which are coming. But they were coming in floodplain. If you look at, but the problem is also, I think this is also something we have to think. We have to also look at in 60s, 70s, perhaps the floodplains were thought like a vacant land, ready for development. I mean, we were looking at a big opportunity being lost, because so much of vacant land is all along the rivers, not only in Delhi, everywhere in the country, all rivers. And people thought it's a kind of such a great land is there. And we all know, I was in urban development also, I know the value of real estate. And then we were looking at the RERA, so I know the kind of power they have got, that sector has got. I mean, that sector is also important for economy. But again, going back to the power plant thing, who is having, I mean, that vacant land, real estate project will come. I think Pratima may remember, we had a case in NGT in somewhere in Agra, where they were doing in the Yamuna, and then they said whether it is floodwell or not. We used some GIS, some technology from NMCG, and we reported to NGT that this is part of the floodplain. So I think that real estate project was given some regulation or stopped. But the thing is, when you see that kind of land, and your report also try to, I mean, I'm just trying to, I may not be correct, that your core area, some of the area there is an increase in core also, somewhere you have relatively said, somewhere it's more increase, somewhere less increase, and all that. And what are the reasons? Sometimes we say whether there was a non-availability of land. Second can be theoretical reasons. There could be a policy, there could be a master plan, there could be some regulation which stopped them, some DCR, something may be there. But the thing is on the fringe, and you also say that the outer side, because more land is there, more development, more work is coming up, more urbanization takes place there. Now, what happens to that whole urbanization? Because you may be impacting a huge water body there. I think recently in Chandigarh also there was saying that we bought so much of flats at the outer skirt of Chandigarh, and then our apartments are full of water because they are basically water body on which the construction happened. Bangalore, Whitefield, the same thing. Sometimes some of the old core area do not get flooded, but some of the new area get flooded. So I think this is again something which you have to say, that because we have simply lost these floodplains. As very typically I used to say that we all develop on the bank of river or waterfront, but slowly we become so big, the river gets lost. Yamuna in Delhi gets lost, except a very rare occasion like this when Yamuna is becoming all prevalent and everyone is talking, and suddenly the person in the news channel and all that, they are saying the powerful Yamuna and potent Yamuna, and till other day we used to say Yamuna does not exist, it's a Nala, the same Yamuna. So I think this is something we also have to be very clear, that I think this has to go to the city managers, that the life of a river, life of a water body, lake is much, much larger than human being or human civilization. We can think of 300 years, 400 years, 2000 years. But this has been there much beyond that. So for a river, what makes I mean, one day in the life of river is equal to more than 100 years of our life. So it can take back what you say in Himachal Pradesh. I think some of the buildings, some of the hotels, we had seen it in 2013 also in Uttarakhand. It's not that we are saying something very new. So we had seen it there also. So again, I think that's something which is very important. Uh, when we perhaps look at, I think I already told about new demand, new water demand be project, that how much will be the demand of this city in 2050, this and that. And we all talk that we are urbanizing very soon. Country will also be having more than 50% people living in the urban area. Globally, it is already the case. Now, many project that demand, how it will come, and unfortunately I will tell you, I mean academically I also studied engineering before joining IAS, but we always look at the solution because we have technology, we'll bring water, we'll have a huge pipeline. Agra has a drinking water scheme based upon Ganga water being on the bank of Yamuna. You can have several such examples all over country where this is happening. People are very happy. In Bihar, almost all towns are now depending upon Ganga water, and they all celebrate that both Gaya will also get Ganga water. Bard will also, I mean, everywhere this is, but we are not looking at our local source, local rivers. I can tell you there are thousands and thousands of local resources, local rivers of 20-kilometer length, 30-kilometer length, 50-kilometer length within the district. They can be rejuvenated, and you can very easily satisfy the need of those things. But anyway, when you will look at the projection for your water, drinking water in the long run, now from where it will come? And then groundwater is almost, I think, 40%, roughly around many cities, 40% will also come from groundwater. Now the groundwater, if you keep on constructing, but the problem is, look at the city manager's plight, because he has new projects. Government wants a new project to come, new industry to come. So I think he also has to say yes, because ultimately development, employment, all those things become a kind of, you have to have a trade-off. So now at that point of time, how will he know that this is the area which he is diverting is a very, very active aquifer, or that's very important from the groundwater point of view? So the loss of that land. So I think scientifically we can develop certain ways of saying that this is a kind of very potential area, and then also attach some number, and this is this many million liters of water is stored there. This will help you. Suppose your need is 2000 in future, 500 can come from here. So by constructing, by losing it, you are also losing so much of drinking water. So I think, can we have a kind of this kind of narrative built? Can we think of looking at some of these things, and then correlation between different factors? So I think I'm quite sure as we go ahead, I think many of these things will also come. Again, there is a lot of discussion. Problem is now we experts also we pick up different area, and there is a seminar will be only on the nature based solution, NBS. But there is so much of NBS possible in the city, existing NBS. I mean, we don't have to go into the technological way and bring new NBS. There is so much of NBS there. Your riparian forest area is very much there. I think Pratima will talk about riverfront. Riverfront is all there. But what we get, the demand is always to make a concretized riverfront. remove sometimes those forests also, cut them down and then make it this thing. Now Amrut 2.0, there is a very nice thing about rejuvenation of water body, urban water body. I mean, there is a provision. Earlier there was not there. Swachh Bharat Mission is also in the version 2. They're talking about little bit on the water. So I think we have got some very nice urban missions bringing some source of water. But there again, I think a group of like this, because many consultants, when you look at under Amrit 2.0, a rejuvenation of an urban water body, uh, think what is the need of the water body? What does it want? If water body can speak, what will it ask you to do? Rather, if I am a kind of city dweller, if I go to that place, what I want? Often the second is true, because we'll go and make a huge concrete compound wall, we'll beautify it, we will design, I think all of you are expert, we will design the whole landscape in such a way that more and more concrete comes. So I think that's not the way to rejuvenate or protect that water body. So I think this is again something which perhaps we have to look at. I don't say that you don't have to give some facility, because ultimately some amenity, some facility also has to be done, because without that people will feel that this is too dirty a place to visit, and that attachment, that connect will be lost. So I think that's also very important. But at the same time, look at from that perspective. So then we are really water sensitive if we do that. Then I think recently NIU, I think only few days back, we have taken up a kind of pilot project about looking at some of the water heritage, some step wells rejuvenation and other things. Let me also tell you, Ministry of Jal Shakti last year, towards the end of the last year, they constituted a committee on water sensitive structures, not water water heritage structures in the country. Old step wells, Grand Anikat of Kaveri. I think we have got excellent examples of managing water. Many of our temples, especially South Indian temples, you have a kind of channel in the rock cut, so that I think from the Vimana that water comes and it goes to the temple tank. Many of them, that was a rainwater harvesting. I think we have bylaws and we will talk about that. But can we also do something about our water heritage? Again, bring it in the center stage of our studies and all that. And before I end, another point, as I told you, communicating with urban managers is one. All the technical knowledge, giving them some idea what they can do. But I think we also have to do something where there is a kind of partnership among these cities. Like these 10 cities are there. I'm quite sure there will be, I think there is a kind of river city alliance which is there. So use this partnership, and then not only that, drive this change in the academic institution. We have Professor Mandhopadhyay here. I think she is aware with SPA. We started some sort of thesis competition. So involve the students. I think when they are learning landscape architecture or urban planning or housing and these kind of thing, housing is very important. I think those who are looking at housing mission, they only count the number of houses. So many lakhs, so many crores of houses have been added. But actually, when you are bringing this new housing colony, don't think that only private players harm the natural system through their action, not intentionally. Let's say lots of government projects also actually get constructed in the floodplain. Lots of them also, because the person who is in charge of the housing, I think we all are excellent in working in silo. He gets some land, his target of constructing so many houses, and the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana or some scheme or some state schemes is met the moment he gets the land and he starts constructing. But whether that land is obstructing a kind of channel, whether it's actually going to obstruct the water flow. So I think there are several things which we have to look at. So I think let's also think that how some of these ideas can go into universities. Because once we started thesis competition, one very positive thing was lots of teachers started taking interest, their guides there. So I think you get so many professors, assistant professors getting into this kind of thinking and from multiple fronts. So I think your study will know more detail about that. How exactly we can perhaps look at people, all of you are such a great expert with huge commitment for this cause. I'm quite sure we will be having a great churning of ideas as we proceed, and as I think Samrat will moderate and ask all of us, all of you mainly. My, I think, turn is over, so he will leave me. But I think all of you will get some good probing questions from him. Having worked with him, I know he can be very, very challenging. Okay. Okay, then all the best, and thank you once again, Samrat, and all your team in WRI for initiating a great dialogue on this subject, which is absolutely important. And only thing which I will tell you, this is something we cannot wait. That Kabir's Doha, काल करे सो आज कर, आज करे सो अब, पल में प्रलय होएगा, बोहरी करेगा कब. Means is what you have to do tomorrow, do it today. What you should do today, do it now. Because if the calamity becomes bigger or real calamity comes, you won't have any time to do anything. Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning our publication. It's really good to hear that you have also taken the time to look through that. It's really heartening to know that people are also seeing it. And some of the points you make actually are really, really important in terms of just that whole piece on ground tools and support to urban managers. How do we really move towards that? The talking of just having a whole diverse portfolio of how we look at water. And I think the most excellent thing that you did was really connect the network that you have worked with everyone in this room, really. So it's really amazing to see that this whole group is together, and hopefully through deliberations we at least move the conversation forward. But a brief presentation, still just to set a little bit more context. So just quickly, I'll go over some of the, I mean, this is of course nothing new, something that all of us are very aware of, but just growing cities, growing populations, and growing stresses, and some of the insights from our publication and the maps. And then we'll move on to the deliberations. So these are some of the maps that we have generated in the publication. I'm just focusing on Delhi, just context, and we are all here. And also Delhi is a bit of an outlier the way it is structured and so on. But one of the key findings, we find that built up area in Delhi, and we were looking at the airtime between 2000 and 2015, has increased by 61% across the entire region. So that's a 0 to 50 kilometer region that we are looking at. And why is this interesting? It's not just a number. This is where the interesting part comes in when we look at the maps. You can see all the red is things that were added, built up area added between 2000 to 2015. Grays are what was there before, the spatial mapping that was done. And of course, the public management really comes into play. We can see a lot of the development is technically not within Delhi's boundary, it's in what is Uttar Pradesh. So that context is very important. And I think Delhi, in terms of the cities we looked at, is different because none of the other cities have this very transboundary sort of situation. But this is how development has happened in this city. If we look at between 2000 to 2015, and then if we split it into what's happening in the core versus in the periphery, you can clearly see that in the core there is development, there is an increase, but the proportion and the rate of increase in what is called the periphery, which is substantiated by that map we saw, is much, much higher. So we are looking at 21% increase in the core area, that's the 0 to 20 kilometer region, 116% increase in built up area if we are looking at the periphery. Now, built up area, does that exist just by itself? It is actually, one assumes that cities are being built to house people. So then we look at what sort of population changes have happened. Again, these are estimates. This is not, of course, 100% exact accurate data. We are looking at estimates. But what the estimates tell us is, again, the core houses a larger population. There has been some increase, but the proportion of increase in the peripheral regions much higher. So 32% increase in the core regions versus a 54% increase in population in the peripheral regions. And these are just things to keep in mind when we get into the more of the deliberations, just setting the context for that. So that really brings us to growing cities, growing populations, but growing stresses. So one of the things that we can think of is heat and drought. And this is an image from last year when we had that extremely severe heat wave happening. This is from NASA's a new system that was launched last year, and what they had looked at was heat islands. This is nighttime temperature they were looking at, and clearly places which are built up, even smaller places like Sonipat, Panipat, clearly much hotter than surrounding regions. Of course, we talk of heat island and so on, but if you look at the difference, it's 35 degrees Celsius in the red zones, 15 degrees Celsius in the cool zones, blue zones. I had to double check this 3 times, that we are looking at a 20 degrees Celsius difference in temperature. And this is nighttime, mind you. Imagine daytime temperatures which are higher. This just snowballs into so much more of how our cities are going to function, right? What about productivity, heat comfort? How do people actually live? Not everyone has the luxury of an air-conditioned environment. So something again to think of. So while heat drought is one aspect, the other aspect, of course, rain flood. This is something that's, of course, been doing the rounds on Twitter and social media the past few days, sort of comparing historical imagery, a painting from the 1600s where we see the waters have reached the Red Fort, and this is what happened last week. And this is of course a challenge. This is infrastructure that's impacted. For Delhi, a lot of the water treatment plants actually had water enter into them, so that directly impacted drinking water supply. So it's a whole cascade of things. But more than this image, I think we also need to look at this and think of, whether it's heat, drought, rain, or flood, it's really the human cost. It's the health of people who are impacted because water is not available. It's the health of people affected because there's sort of spread of diseases, property loss, and just and we know we are hearing all of these stories coming out. The cab driver on my way to the hotel a couple of days ago was telling me that a lot of people who are on the floodplains are displaced. They are just living in sort of almost like refugee camps all along into Noida, because what do people do? So these are some of the human impacts that we really have to deal with. It's a very immediate connection of how our cities grow and function that we have to think of, and that's again something that everyone knows, but again to bring to the forefront of what do you do about it. Moving on, a few spatial insights, and Sir's already mentioned that this is of course very linked, that where we have built our cities are actually impacting what's happening. So sort of 2-3 things that I'm flagging here, again drawing from our publication. There are of course a huge range of other impacts as well, but we look at losing lakes, losing vegetation, and therefore losing resilience. This is a snapshot of some maps that we looked at for Chennai and Hyderabad for some lakes, and what we see, the browns are actually from Survey of India maps. And that's the interesting thing, right? We sometimes the question is that we don't have data. No, we do have data. It's just about how do we use it, find it and use it. So if you look at Survey of India maps, very detailed, extremely rigorously detailed maps, and we just overlay those outlines with Google Earth images today. And just to give us a bit of a closer look at this, this is what is happening. We have a lot of development that's come inside. Of course, there are whole discussions on legality, encroachment, so on. But I think that's a side of it. A lot of these sort of development are development authority layouts and so on. So it's very interesting to note that there's one whole question of legality, and there's the whole question of us not recognizing how hydrological systems actually work. And of course, when you overlay climate change onto that, everything that we have described as hydrological systems may be just much larger. And again, this is something to think of. Another piece we have is around vegetation. So all the yellows that we see are sort of low level loss. This basically indicates in the study that we have not cut down a forest. We have not grown a forest either, but there have been low level losses and gains. It's very interesting that for Delhi, in the sort of more central area, we see some low level gain. And this is very surprisingly there across many of the other cities. But the outer periphery has a significant amount of loss happening as well. And what does that mean? Like, sure, vegetation is gained, is lost, but in Delhi, there's a net trend that more has been lost than gained. And how does that impact resilience? So we actually did a little bit of an analysis on how areas have different recharge potential. Again, this is a satellite imagery. There are limitations to this. We were looking at just the slope of a land, which we'll take from digital elevation, and the vegetation cover. And of course, if we get more detailed on-ground data, we can make this a much more robust system, as I was suggesting, a much more detailed analysis of what is what value can you assign areas and therefore protect them, like give the evidence for that. But what we can see here is that about 66% of new development in Delhi in that 15-year period we looked at is cited on high and very high recharge potential zones. So this is something to keep in mind, and something that, again, for urban managers to look at is where are you citing new development. It's not to say don't grow cities. I mean, cities have a lot of benefits they provide. They are actually sites of economic productivity. They are sites of where people have an opportunity to improve their lives and livelihoods. But where we choose to do are something that we have to rethink again. And moving on from here, as Sir had mentioned, we have the maps at the end of the publication, but I'm hoping to give you a quick view of some more of the maps a little bit in detail. This platform is just to showcase the maps, because if everyone's seen if people have seen the publication, we have this great thing, the maps are in the appendix. I feel bad that maybe not everyone's going to see that. Here we hope we can make this an interactive space for people to look at and understand what is being shown in a much more visual manner. our built-up area, all the 10 cities we looked at. We are looking at the statistics of it so that we can compare. Could you click on the, so this actually shows us across, sorry about the quality on the projector, but this is Delhi, bit of an outlier from all other cases. This is Bangalore, also an outlier, very much quite higher than others. Interestingly, Kolkata, Mumbai, there are certain sort of other statistics happening over there. So it's some analysis on how cities are functioning. But this is built up. When we look at blue cover along with that, and if you can click on Ahmedabad, please. Right, thank you. So this is interesting. All the purpose that we see is blue cover that has increased as per our study. And Ahmedabad clearly is showing that there's a lot of increase. In fact, one of the only cities which has an increase, everything else shows decrease in the 15-year period. But if you see the map, and that's where spatializing it is so interesting and important, all the increases along the river. And of course, we know why. There's a lot of development that's happened along the Sabarmati River riverfront. But why is this interesting and important is that any benefits from this are actually not spread citywide, right? So if you're looking at advantages of doing a project and analyzing that, here is something that gives us a clue on, is it actually going to benefit the city in its entirety or not? Could you do groundwater recharge potential? So again, we are looking at just go by the colors. I think you can see a predominance of green over there again. So Bangalore, another city which has extensively grown in its periphery and extensively grown into areas which had hydrological importance in terms of being of high recharge potential. And I think this is something that we see consistently across all of the cities, that the cities are growing, and particularly outside of the municipal boundary, it probably is, as I was saying, that these are scenarios we have to consider and understand. It probably is just easier for developers or even government bodies to build into areas which have higher hydrological significance. So low-lying areas, which one would assume is places where recharge happens, where flooding happens. But it's just easier for people to build because it's maybe cheaper. It might be land that is easier to access because there are lesser regulations. As I said, again, there are limitations in how we do the study, but yes, we are looking at systems over here. This should be now over here. So actually, that's interesting. Yellow is areas with medium recharge. We have to build somewhere. So, okay, this seems to be doing decently. But I think I just want to hark back to one thing that Sir said, is that any development we do is affecting and changing the natural system. So whether we build on low recharge areas or high recharge areas is not the only question. It still has an impact. We need to recognize that. I think that is something that gets lost. Okay, thanks everyone for your patience. I have gone a little over time. But we are moving on to the deliberation part of this at this point. So before we go into that, just want to put this on. Sometimes I think we need the artists and the writers and authors to tell us some obvious truths. So this is Toni Morrison talking about the Mississippi River, talking about how it occasionally floods. And, she's saying that flood is the word that they use, we use. It's not flooding, it is remembering, because water really remembers where it was and it tries to get back to that. So I think this is something to just preface what we are doing. I'll leave this on this slide about the two tracks of discussion that we are going to have. But I won't explain this. I'll hand over to Samrat now to take us through the discussion. And before I do that, I realized I forgot to introduce Samrat. And also welcome to Olga, who joined a little later because she was a bit delayed. Thank you for joining us. I did include you in the introductions. And Samrat is the director of the Water Resilience Program at WRI India. He'll be taking us through this moderated discussion for about an hour going forward now. Thank you, everyone.
Before we start, I was reading a book on systems thinking by Donella Meadows, and in the introduction, there is a very important thing that for any systems thinking, there are three elements. One is the elements. I mean, so if I take, for example, if I take our digestion system, it's the liver, spleen, and other things, which are the elements. Then there are interconnections, that how all these elements work together and to execute something, which is the function, which is the digestion of our food. So this is a sort of a fundamental of a systems thinking. If I bring it over here in the water sensitive urban management, there are elements like the green element, blue element. There are interconnects, and there are functions. Which are the flood resilience, drought resilience, and other things. But what we see lately is that we are just managing the mess. We are not thinking in a systems thinking pattern. And the biggest challenge over there are around some of the feedback loop and the collaboration that needed. Sir mentioned that it's very important to have a stakeholder level collaboration for the urban managers to even think that what are some of these stories are actually talking about. So my first question will be first. We are now talking about water sensitive cities, basin connected cities, so many new terminologies which ultimately talks around pretty much on the similar lines. But unfortunately, most of these frameworks have been developed keeping in mind a developed cities context. I mean, I think thankful to Dipinder ji. Dipinder ji is very vocal about that part. So the first question is that this water sensitive city, basin connected city, so many things, how relevant it is to Indian context. First, I will start with its relevance from a global context, and translating into India. Probably I will ask first Harry, because the entire water sensitive cities context started from Australia. So how it is being managed in Australia, and how do you think that it is can get translated in a cities like India? Then I will go to Olga. You have worked a lot of South Asian and Southeast Asian cities. So how water sensitive cities are currently looked at over the various frameworks and implementation. So that will be after Harry. I will come back to you, and then Dipinder ji, your entire point around its relevance in for an Indian cities context, and what does it mean water sensitive city from a Indian side of relevance. And lastly, I'll come to you, ma'am, regarding some of the interconnects with the disaster risk, the people aspect, and how it talks to each other. So these are the 4 questions in the track 1 that we would like to discuss. So over to you, Harry.
Yeah, thank you, Samrat, for starting the deliberation. So your question on, I suppose, where did the concept of water-sensitive urban design start? I think you're very right in saying that it did start in the developed world. The concept of water-sensitive urban design is the terminology that's used in Australia. It's different terms that's used in Europe, in Singapore, or in United States of America. In Singapore, it's called active, beautiful cities. In China, it's called sponge cities, and so on. Everyone's using different terminology. But it has come from a developed world, that's true. But I think the important question here is what are the principles of water-sensitive urban design, or any of those terminologies? I think those principles are universal, whether it's the developed world or the developing world. And in Australia, we think of it in terms of 3 principles. We think of so water-sensitive urban design. The 3 principles are: so how can the city be its water supply catchment? So often we've been talking about cities drawing water from long distances, but water-sensitive urban design is what can you do with water that falls on your city? So that's one first principle. Your city as your water supply catchment. So the water that falls on the city can be a source of water supply for the city. And I think that principle applies in the developed world as well as the developing world. I have no doubt about that. The second principle of water-sensitive cities is that what can the city do to provide ecosystem services to the city? So often we think of cities have created damage to the environment, and that's true. That's happening in the developed world. that's also happening in the developing world. The built environment is impacting on the natural environment. So we need to be thinking now the reverse. The city was the problem. How can the city be now the solution to the problems we're facing? And again, that principle applies in the developed world, applies in the developing world. Of course, in the developed world, the problems are different. We're talking often that we have already met our basic water services like drainage, sewerage, and water supply. So water-sensitive urban design is trying to address new problems, new ecosystem services. For example, the damage that drainage did to the natural environment when we tried to create concrete channels, we've damaged the natural environment. So now we're trying to reverse that impact by using water-sensitive urban design principles and approaches. So I guess that second principle is applicable in the developing world. The benefit here is that it's early stage here in India. You're grasping with meeting your basic water services, as well as starting to try to, I guess, minimize your impact on the environment, and also finding a diversity of water sources in the city. So what can the city do to meet the basic water services, but also aspiring to meet services around protecting the environment, providing multiple sources of water, and then finally also around climate resilience. So second principle applies to the developed and developing world. And the third principle of water-sensitive cities is institutions making water-sensitive decisions. And this one is the harder one, because institutions need to learn those principles and needs to also start making water-wise decisions. And you rightly point out earlier on that we need to communicate to city managers about water-sensitive urban design, and that's the challenge. We've got to start somewhere. Everyone needs to be making water-sensitive decisions, from government to land development to community to institutions, and that principle applies in the developed world as well as the developing world. So I might leave it here on those three principles. I think that sets the context rightly, that it is water-sensitive urban design is a real need across the globe in cities. And I think it's regardless whether it's in the developed world or developing world, those three principles apply universally. It's just now the pathway to achieving that in the different local contexts is what we need to be thinking about.
Right. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today. Thank you very much for having me. So I'll reflect indeed a little bit on the experience I have with cities across Asia. So it's been about 18 years. I've been working in the field of climate change resilience and sustainable urban development. And so I notice an interesting and a positive trend that happened over the last few years. When I say few years, maybe 5, 7 approximately. So before that, most of the time when you would be invited to work with cities, and so I work with cities on behalf of United Nations organizations or development banks. Essentially, we are a consultancy and a think tank working with international development institutions and supporting cities. So until these few years, when you would come to the city will tell you where its issues lie. So flooding, of course, is always coming up as one of the main issues. And then they will tell you the engineering solution they have in mind. So then you would examine different engineering solutions, different issues they have, and then you would, think of a project that you think would be most impactful and, help them link it to finance. So what you could notice is that it would be a very kind of problem-fixing approach. So we already have waterlogging there, so there is flooding happening here every year. So now what do? Do we put pumping stations? We worked with one Thai city which requested us to actually increase the wall which they had to prevent one area of the municipality to be flooded. So we were a bit reluctant, but then we went ahead with this project. So a few years later, the same city came to us and asked for more money to now build the wall even higher, and also the wall started depleting, so you needed maintenance. And it was quite a lot. I think for that add-on intervention, it was about $100 million only. So what you could see is that this approach is very resource consuming, because you're just dealing with one thing. You're just fixing that issue in that specific place. That too, this issue often will go somewhere else. So now if my area of municipality is not flooded, then where does this water go? So someone is going to get flooded. Now a change started occurring. I think 5-7 years ago, we started talking about ecosystem-based adaptation. Now the new wording for it is nature-based solutions. In fact, I just come from Shillong, where I was part of a G20 event, and the event was called Nature Solves. So now we are very much in this approach where we understand that quick fixing is, one, expensive, and two, not efficient in the long run. So now we want to see how we can fix things on a more long term and harness on the existing. We really talk about climate change as one of the key reading elements of a city or of any other place for that matter. So there is a way of seeing how climate evolved in the past and looking at climate models, how it will evolve in the future. For example, I learned that now every city of India has to do a climate change action plan, and there are IITs involved into quite sophisticated and very good quality future data modeling based on regional climate models, which also take into consideration topography and local features, which is extremely positive. So you understand how climate will evolve, and hence what kind of rainfall patterns we are going to expect, which is an important component both for managing potential floods and for managing water supply. In addition to this, we would look at impact modeling, where now you understand how the water cycle is happening. So at different levels, it is water that derives from rainfall, but it is also groundwater. And what is the status of the groundwater? Is it depleting? Is it increasing? What is the quality of groundwater? And we look at water in a cyclical manner. So there are water inflows, there is water supply that we use, there is wastewater. So how all of this is interconnected? Because in the end, it all happens, in one territory. So for example, if your sewage water is not managed well, then chances are that if groundwater is used in some places for consumption purposes, it is going to be contaminated. So there is impact modeling that can be done, and recently we've discovered, so we always try to work faster and with less financial resources, because that's what developing cities need. So now machine learning is a very promising new way of doing it, rather than doing a very sophisticated hydrological modeling, for example, which too requires a lot of data cities often don't collect. So there are ways now of collecting less data and doing things faster with machine learning, and things are really coming up. So technology can really be helpful in this assessment step. So this step is pretty much, and then a last component of this assessment step is looking at exposure. So once you have the maps of where water is, where it is likely to be in the future as per different scenarios, then you really can see which assets are affected. And when you plan your city ahead, you can clearly see which areas you can put what. So it gives you that information level, you can cover it relatively easily. A lot of satellite data is available where data gaps are in cities today as well. Now comes the critical point, which always is the key issue in implementation, in my view. It is the willingness to do long-term planning. Because the fixing solutions that I talked about initially, this is something everyone is keen on. Okay, we have waterlogging again this year, so is there some fund which can help us put some money into it and we'll fix it? That much is happening, but this is never addressing the issue at the core. So now that when we have the information, we need to do long-term planning and really see where we want to allow for cities to expand, where we don't want to allow, where we, on the contrary, we want to revive a natural ecosystem. And when you look at it, some cities are doing it really successfully. For example, I'm quite amazed to see that Hong Kong which is extremely populated, allows development only on, I think, 23% of the territory, 23, 25. The rest is natural parks. So it creates a lot of social issues. I'm not saying that's the best way to go, but it shows that with the intention, you can actually preserve your ecosystems pretty efficiently. Another example, which again would be developed Asia, but Singapore, we really follow this case very closely. And we see that while the population is increasing, the green and blue ecosystems are also increasing. So it's not contradictory. It's not that because you have more people that you necessarily need to have more built up. In fact, Singapore, in terms of its vision, also moved from calling themselves a garden city to now calling themselves city in nature. So they want to go even one step further and have wild nature. So these things are happening, but critical is this will to look beyond one political mandate, because I think in India the political mandate of a mayor is 5 years. For the commissioner, is it 5 years as well, the appointment? Or sometimes, yes, it can be less as well. Right. So in the Philippines, the mayor is there for 3 years. So these are not the time frames in which you look at a water cycle. So how do we incentivize? How do we put at the national level a system which actually makes it compulsory to act differently? And I'll give you one example which I quite like, is the example of the Philippines. So in 2015, the Ministry of Urban Affairs, it's called slightly differently, but that's what they're doing, associated with the Ministry of Environmental Affairs, and they created a regulation as per which every 5 years, every city has to create a comprehensive land use plan in which climate change and disaster risk reduction have to be embedded. So as a result, at province level, the National Institute in the Philippines is doing climate change projections of how climate will change. And then cities, smaller cities get assistance, bigger cities do it themselves. Everyone is doing the screening, what I said exactly, that process. Now it's compulsory. So every 5 years you have to submit this updated plan. And before it was not happening. Now everyone is doing it because you have to do it. So some mechanisms like this have to be in place, where no matter who is the mayor today, who is the commissioner today, who is in charge of what, there is a process everyone has to follow. And I feel with this long-term planning, until we bring it up, it is not going to happen. Because I've worked with so many cities, we've drafted so many reports, most of them, to be very honest, remain reports, and that's very desolating. So the key issue is how do we move out of that? And last thing on which I would like to end, which again I learned when I was in Shillong and spoke with people in Meghalaya, their communities are very empowered. So it's a different situation where tribal communities essentially own, I think, over 70% of the land in Shillong, for example. So they have to be consulted, they have to be involved for the city to do anything. But then I thought it's such a great learning where, we always talk about empowering communities, but in the end, we just conduct some public hearing, share with them what we do. If you found a way of really hearing them, providing technical ideas, hearing their feedback, that could also propel that long-term planning process, because then the politician also needs to, there is a need on the other side. People don't demand that. People see what is needed today, but no one demands preserving an ecosystem in the long run. I mean, actually people do, but it's not so spread. So if that could become more of a movement, I think that would also feed that need for long-term policies, which I talked about.
So one of the things that we always talk, that the carrying capacity of the cities or the environmental planning of cities, okay, and so far neither we have any assessment of the carrying capacities of the cities or environmental planning at a city level. Even simple thing like, sir, you probably can talk about the flood zone planning is still not there. And some of the challenges are actually happening because we really don't have a flood zone planning. So any specific comment, in comparison to your Philippines example, any specific comment for Indian cities that they can think of? Sorry, just a connected question.
No, I think it's a very, very valid question. And I feel the challenge in India compared to certain other countries the beauty and the advantage also, but equally a challenge, is its federal setup. Federal setup, and where power is, really distributed across different levels. So as a result, the central government is, to my knowledge of what I've learned when I've been working in India, is quite reluctant into putting up some compulsory policies in terms of cities. So I remember a few years ago, before COVID, NIUA was actually working on, I think, guidelines. I don't remember how it was called. There was a document which would guide cities on how they should develop. And we discussed it at that point in time, and there was intentional will not to make anything compulsory, but just make it at the recommendation level. And in my experience, in countries where things work, is where at some point there is a regulation which comes from the understanding that this is going to benefit everyone, which then kind of, trips down, and then cities get to work. So here, maybe certain states could pilot it, because in my understanding, urban is the domain of states. So maybe certain states could, pilot some regulations, and then, based on that, maybe other states would be interested in learning. But essentially, it's very difficult to expect every city to do it on its own, because, as you said, precisely, capacities are very different, understanding is very different, there are vested interests involved, there are many things. So somehow I learned in my experience with many countries that the way where it becomes most efficient is when higher level government takes stake in it and then supports the subnational levels in implementation. I don't know if it helps much as an answer.
No, it helps actually. Land and colonization, urbanization is a state subject. So there is a kind of this thing. If you legislate or do something, there is also a protest. But as you also say, if it comes from little top and with some compulsion, then things happen. In case of River Ganga, what happened? We invoked Environment Protection Act and gave an order declaring it as an authority, and then laying some principles for rejuvenation of a river, and coming quickly to only floodplain zonation, because that authority order can be very vast. So in that we said that floodplain has to be protected, and regulation of activities on the floodplain all along the river. But practically there are a lot of difficulties, because you don't know where is your floodplain. And there is a lot of dispute about that between the irrigation department of the state and some of the agencies. Some area there is no demarcation. So we also initiated that NGT supported. So sometimes the legal support also helps, because now the moment it went there, the National Green Tribunal included it as one of the action point for the states in the river rejuvenation plan. So I think under that focus it started. Uttarakhand and UP, we have done some success, but Bihar says that if we do the floodplain, our floodplains are so large, all our cities will be in the floodplain itself. So I think that's where the dispute is going on. But thankfully, the UP government, for other rivers also, they have started looking at the floodplain. At least, as you say, the long-term sensitization has just started happening. I don't think that some wonderful things have happened, but at least something has happened. And that's why when we say urban river management plan, first priority is a floodplain regulation, protection of floodplain. And sometimes some of these disasters like Delhi flood and all that can actually give some leverage to talk more strongly about these things, and this is the time people may listen to you. I am not 100% sure, but yes, our memories are also very short, so that's another problem. We forget things very quickly till the next disaster comes.
Dipinderji,
my experience started from the sanitation to the water, and I was also in NIUA, and we used to have a sanitation capacity building platform where we used to talk about urban sanitation, decentralized sanitation systems. The issue was that even in decentralized sanitation system, they started talking about city-wide inclusive sanitation, even in decentralized sanitation systems. So when I came to CSE, I was confronted with two separate kind of programs. We had one water program, one wastewater program. And the water program had its set of trainings and research work, and wastewater had its another set of work. So for example, we had, and Shivani is here, she's my ex-colleague in CSC. We had a water sensitive urban design planning module and training. We had a green infrastructure, rainwater harvesting, We also added groundwater. And on this parallel to it was a decentralized non-sewage sanitation program going on. I found it quite contradictory in the sense that we are talking about cities and we are talking about programs and projects, but there doesn't seem to be a connect. So in NMCG, we had a program with NMCG, courtesy Rajiv ji, on promoting a water sensitive cities framing. So we felt this is a very good opportunity to try to link both and not look at water sensitive cities in isolation. We started doing research on what existed as discourse on water sensitive cities, and in India itself had so many water climate resilient cities, and of course smart cities was always there before that. So we looked at the available frameworks. We looked at the WSC framework from Monash University, and we felt that it was very normative and techno-managerial, and it defined the context well of the global north, but did not meet our context and our requirements. So we used it as a reference. We did not critique it. We thought, let's come up with our own framework as an original contribution to the water sensitive cities understanding, and therefore we came out with this global south water sensitive cities, which we believe is our original contribution at CSC on water sensitive cities for global south. And the need therefore in our work was, how do we see a framework? See, after NIUA, I also taught for a year in Shivnadar University, where I tried to integrate the concepts of urban planning with both sanitation as well as water, and which was also very lacking. And therefore, I could see that what is developed in the global north as water sensitive cities reflects their context, is very valid, is required. I have no problem with it, but somehow fails when it is applied to the global south cities. There's our planned cities. They're looking at second generation challenges of addressing drainage, which came out of SUDs, and they're looking at improving their systems and second order of livable cities and all that. Whereas for us, the challenge was that our existing infrastructure itself is not there. And the colony opposite to our office in Sangam Bihar, it would flood with 15 minutes rain. And when I joined there, they said, just wait for the monsoon, there'll be boats here. And that is the context in which we are. Therefore, for us, it was very important to come up with something which, as principles, because if you have to come up with a framework, you have to have principles, you have to have index and a goal, of course, to begin with. So we felt that applying a political economy framework, again from the academia, is required in the water sensitive cities narration, because it's essentially a discourse, and when it translates without an anchoring with either a political ecology or political economy, it becomes normative and techno-managerial. So we applied that understanding and we came out with 4 principles and 4 index. So, this is the framework. Actually, we used it as for our output of the Nimami Gange water sensitive cities. We put it in the Ganga context, although it is applicable elsewhere. So we define the 4 principles, and I will not define that, but essentially it is looking at water and water sensitive cities from a historical material perspective of long-term vision and planning, which is missing in our context. Climate change, the second principle we said, exacerbates already existing water scarcity and inequity in the issues. Designing needs to be, the whole thing WSUD, and P was added afterthought, because agreed, in the developed north, you don't need a planning priority. It's already planned. Whereas for us, we had a big discussion internally, people say, why it should have been WSUPD, water sensitive urban planning and design. So for various, nuts, if you see, it's very different. Then reducing conflicts. In the global south, there are conflicts on water. which is again not an issue there. So it doesn't feature as a principle, as a very high principle. And of course, improving functionality of existing infrastructure. So these were the four principles, and then we came. I'll just end with these four index. So people said, well, what is a framework? Framework essentially is a set of ideas and facts to explain something. You choose those facts and ideas deliberately to develop something. A framework is not a discourse. So a discourse can be talking of so many things, but a framework, you pick up a few things. So we said when we define the index, let's define it as like this: a functional infrastructure and services, which is missing in the global south context. Our STPs don't work, our treatment plants don't work. Secondly, functional and inclusive infrastructure for unserved areas. So very clearly, for unserved areas, what are the functional and inclusive infrastructure? Thirdly, substantial reuse of treated wastewater and biosolids. Now we brought in the sanitation part in, which is very much global south, which is not required in global north. You don't want to reuse actually. And fourth is this mitigation of in situ urban flooding. Now, this is very pertinent again, since everybody is discussing flood, but we have an issue of mitigation of in situ urban flooding. We need conservation. So sometimes a lot of reviewers have misread our framework, saying that, oh, it is not against conservation. No, it is not against conservation, but we also realize this has to be addressed. So I would encourage you all to just go through it and give us your critique.
Thank you, Samrat, and thank you WRI for inviting me to share my thoughts. It has been a great learning experience that I'm kind of getting. I'm listening to all of you and definitely learning a lot. Now, when we are talking about a systems approach in terms of planning, in terms of the elements, the components, and then the network, and then the output. So as Samrat started in the beginning, now it's very, very linked to the planning exercises that we do. What are the components? What are the networks? And what do you get out of it? What kind of a city do you get out of it? And if you don't go deep into the components part, or you don't go deep into the networks part, you kind of do an ad hoc kind of a thing, your output is going to suffer. So that is a principle that we normally teach the students on. And in the context of students, I would like to say that this thesis competition, sir, that so one of our students is a prize winner. She has worked on regeneration of Varanasi rivers in Varanasi, but not the Ganga, but Varuna and Asse. So, and her work was kind of quite commended. So that is a kind of a linkage with academia and the NMCG that we are also very excited about, and we hope that this is going to continue. Anyway, that apart, when I look at water sensitivity, when we are talking of sensitive, we automatically, I have no problems with the global north, but what I feel that this water sensitive concept should be adapted to the global south, not like we take from what they have done and then just kind of try and fit into our jigsaw puzzle, because that's not going to happen in Indian cities. So maybe we can look at certain pillars wherein we talk of in the context of water. So the first pillar that I would like to perhaps submit is that we can talk of a just city. Where is the water justice? So when we're talking of justice in terms of water, so justice in terms of access to water for everyone. So that kind of takes us more or takes us to those unserved areas, to those shadow areas wherein we provide water. That is one aspect which, as urban planners, as city managers, we have to, or we are kind of, it's a part of the TOR of the city managers, that you have to provide water. Now, when we're talking of that, now what is the just water infrastructure? Now, if you have to provide water, your DPFI guidelines tell us that you have to provide 150 LPCD per person per day, etc., etc. So there is a standard that you have to provide. Now for the Delhi water, what is it? How are we providing that water? We are getting about 150 mgd per day, that is from the Nangal, that is the Satluj river system. We are getting 385 from the Yamuna river system, that's the maximum, but we are getting about 150 from the Nangal, that is Satluj river system. We are getting about 250 mgd from the Ganga river system, and that is how we are running Delhi, or the water. We are providing water to Delhi, and also trying to deal with the kind of, the water scarcity, water conflicts that we have around in our cities. So just taking Delhi, we don't have enough water. So when you talked of the catchment or having your own supply, that I think is a very, very important aspect of water sensitivity. Now, in terms of the recycled capacity, this is all of this data, DJB data, that is only 37 mgd we are able to recycle. Only 37 mgd. So therefore, the water sensitivity is intrinsically linked to how much of our raw water availability, because what we are trying to do is we are trying to get water from areas quite far away from Delhi. How far is Nangal from here, for example? So that is what we are trying to do. Again, another feature of water, that is, if you take it in the context of maybe SDG 6, that is providing clean water to people. So we have Delhi, for example, has an NRW, or non-revenue water, that is unaccounted for water, that consists of water that is lost, water that is not really, we kind of lose that kind of water. It is about 52%. So all this water that we are getting, we are spending a lot, mind you. We are spending public money to get that water, to purify that water, to distribute that water. It's so very expensive. So water is not free as a resource anymore. And despite that, we have an NRW of more than half. So therefore, that is where, once we understand that, once the city managers understand and accept that we need to do something along these lines, and this is something that they accept, that they know, this is an engineering solution. What is the kind of sensitivity that they require to have? How do they cap that NRW? How do they do that? Then look at, the water justice and everything else. So therefore, the access to water also is, an intrinsic part of a just city. So that justice needs to come. Now, when we talk of justice, what is the justice that we are giving to the communities upstream? We are getting water from Nangal, we are getting water from Yamuna. They are compromising on their availability of water, because as the national capital, we need water, and therefore let us do that, right? Are compromising. Communities downstream are suffering. Why? Because we are giving them polluted water. Whatever the pollution that we are throwing into what we call the river Yamuna, or any other river system for that matter, that is what. So where is the justice then? So the justice, water justice that we say, is not only about the residents of a particular city, but also the upstream and the downstream communities. So when we're talking about sensitivity, we need to understand that we should not confine ourselves only to urban, the boundaries, the ULB boundaries, or the local development area boundaries, or whatever. So these administrative boundaries somewhere, confine us to look at a space as in silos, with, and not really allow us to look at the network of water, as Samrat started his introduction with. So therefore, when we look at sensitivity, we need to understand, and we need to identify this kind of justice, water justice, that we're looking at. So the second thing that the second track, or the second pillar, that I would like to draw your attention to, is the value system rotating or revolving around water that we have in this country, which in an urban context is quite diluted. Now, traditionally, we've seen that water has had a lot of importance in our culture. So, if you go to the walled city of Ahmedabad, you will find that despite the original or the traditional system of rainwater harvesting, it is wonderful, the rooftop rainwater harvesting in the walled city of Ahmedabad. So, and and they have this storage system in the basement, where the rainwater is harvested and kept. They have certain conditions to it. As a part of the culture, you don't collect the rains, the early rains. You only collect water from a particular, when the rains occur in a particular, under a particular constellation, meaning thereby that you don't really collect your earlier rains, which are not very good quality water. They're polluted. So you collect only from the later monsoon half, particular nakshatra and a particular constellation arrangement. So these kind of and this water reservoir is always below their sacred space, or the puja room. That is what we've seen in Ahmedabad, walled city. Now, this is something that I feel we need to bring back, if we have to look at a water sensitive city. And that is where, because all of us are stakeholders, it's not only urban managers. I mean, they're good to curse that okay, Delhi is flooded and all that, but then it is actually all of us who are in some way or the other responsible. So that I feel that water sensitive behavior needs to be brought back. The sensitivity, the cultural aspect of it, the traditional aspect of it needs to be brought back. And in somewhere, as teachers, perhaps as faculty members, we need to actually take a lead in this. We do understand that. The third part is the urban flooding, or the risk scape. We look at risks in terms of hazard, vulnerability, resilience, etc., etc. But then water, or at least the flooding, is intrinsically related also to scarcity. One of my students did a very interesting thesis. She based it on Chennai, and we found that those wards which are most liable to get flooded are the wards which suffer the most water scarcity in the summers. So therefore, there is we need to understand this intrinsic relationship, and we also need to understand that urban flooding is a development-based disaster. It is a function of flawed development. So it is not the river that is to be blamed. It is we who are to be blamed, who build the ring road on the moat of the Red Fort, right? So risk sensitive development is what we need to look at. Now, there is a guideline, the National Disaster, just give me half a minute. The National Disaster Management Authority has published a guideline on urban flooding, where it has a lot of action points and even identifies who will do what and at what time, before, after, Now, response is one thing, but then what we need to focus on is the mitigation and the preparedness part of it. So, but then this particular, and this has come up in this guideline on urban flooding was published in 2010, 13 years back. I have never seen any of the urban managers even being aware of it, leave alone. And there is a lot of words used in terms of mainstreaming. We need to mainstream, and we need to do this, we need to mainstream disaster risk reduction into the development process. But these are there, use them. These guidelines are there, they tell you every department, they point out every department which and who should do what when it should be there. So the risk scape again is something that we need to delve into, and we cannot just say that acha ye to this is the work of disaster management people, they will see. Normally we try to do that, silos. We, most of the ULB administration kind of hurtle from one issue to another, so they don't have time to sit down and read and study. So we need to find out a mechanism wherein all these working in silos can be kind of converted into more integrated functioning. So at the end of it, I would say that water sensitive cities is sensitivity of value system, sensitivity in access to water, and sensitivity in governance. So the ABC of water sensitivity could be access, behavior, and the circularity. And I am really glad that Dipender has talked about how we cannot actually, differentiate between water and wastewater. We need to bring in a circularity or a circular economy in water. So that is all I had to say.
Very quickly, we are moving into track 2. The track 2 is around how some of the things that we can implement around the water sensitive urban management to fast track some of these concepts. And we do have here Manushi, Nidhi, and Pratima ma'am who are working with multiple cities to implement some of the water sensitive urban design projects or have implemented already. So probably it will be great to hear your perspective of views around some of those great things to do, and what are probably the challenges and opportunities that you have faced, or the great impact that you have achieved through. I think it's really important while we talk about policy and practice, also the tricks of the business, how within the existing complexity, how can still look for some of the opportunities. So probably I can start with Nidhi, with you first. If you can talk about your Gurgaon project and also the opportunities, challenges, and other things.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'll just share. We've been working on a couple of projects across Gurgaon, but primarily on the Badshahpur Forest Corridor. So this was a corridor that was part of the original Badshahpur waterway that drained the water from Aravali through Ghata across through Najafgarh into the Yamuna. And over time, because of construction encroachments, there was a lot of it became basically there was just debris and malba, and it was encroached. And over the years, there was a lot of flooding in Gurgaon, as a result of which they built a concrete box drain in that stretch. So the entire corridor, I think it's now about 20 kilometers before the NGT stopped it. So when we got on the project, we worked with an NGO on a project that was funded by corporates but for the government. So that gave us a modicum of control of design as a tool to show what can be better practice. Because even though the drain was built, Gurgaon continues to be flooded, particularly this area. So this area is from the southern peripheral road to the highway. So the impact is, evident every day. The project that we took on was to develop that corridor primarily as a mobility corridor, as a green corridor, planting with natives. We took on that showcasing stormwater management on the site for the city and for this entire region was part of what we were trying to achieve, as well as use all the waste that we found on site, because there was a lot of waste. Because we are landscape architects using landform and very little structure. Because at the end of the day, this is a public project. Our control beyond a very short maintenance period through our clients is not going to take place. I think it's really nice to hear all the ideas of policy, because we say these things, but when you get on the ground, it's very different. We talk of urban managers, but they don't exist. There are no urban managers. They are overstressed, overstressed engineers who are running helter skelter, firefighting the last storm, the last flood, the last drought, the last issue. The support that we started the project with, fighting them every day, of have a vision, plan this, this is what we're intending. And I think our effort was less design and more advocacy, more capacity building, more educating, and even what Olga was saying about the continuity. A lot of them don't last more than 6 months. So you're spending that effort constantly to explain and convince, and we felt this was important to see it through, because that's the only way you can show what could be done. And what helped us, and I think what was interesting with a lot of you said, is the fact that it's not just water. But I would say it's not just water, it's not just sewage, it's the land, it's the air, it's the people, it's the land use. So a lot of master planning is land use based. Even in Delhi, I know we talk about urban managers from a Delhi perspective. Delhi has a lot of experts. Most other cities, and I say Gurgaon because shockingly, Gurgaon's population has increased 3 times in 10 years. So the same people who are managing cannot keep up with the rate of development. The planning is the idea of planning is land use based, is development based, but that is because there is no thought to the entire open space structure. And even though as networks of water, even in Gurgaon, that what we've looked at, there are networks. The networks are gone, but there are no alternatives. We're not adapting and recreating an alternative to the areas that we're developing. We're looking at developments as individual spaces and leaving the government to come back and say, okay, you will deal with it. And they don't have the capacity or the money or the capacity within or even the ability to give out projects to do these things. We were able to, so just to give you a couple of metrics, we reused almost all the waste we found. I don't know the exact amount, but a very significant amount of waste was reused in terms of design and structure, in terms of creating landform. The entire water of the neighborhood is sometimes pumped into the site. We built it as a floodable site. So there is a 5.5 kilometer walking, cycling corridor, jogging tracks, a native emerging forest. So this is located between Hero Honda Chowk, if you're familiar, and Narsinghpur, which is flooding right now. So this site at the end, particularly, which we fought the last entire year to be able to build the last stretch, because we raised a corridor to create low areas for water retention. And the idea, because they pumped water every year, because of how the highway was constructed, the natural drainage was blocked. Hero Honda Chowk every year is flooded. So they pumped water into this site, and the water stood on the drain till it went into the drain eventually, which is the main city drain. So we wanted to say recharge the entire groundwater, we'll manage it. So we fought to get just that bit through, a 500-meter stretch for a year. And we had to finish this year, so we said we would do it. We did it, even though we didn't get the entire area that we had. None of that area flooded. The flooding is moved on down the road. But the problem is the effort then is still the answer when you're asking for a drainage solution is build a drain. Because not only because it's the answer, because you want to show some expenditure, you want to show something tangible as something you can manage. Now, even a project like this, it only works to a point where the challenges will not stop here. I think one thing we don't take into account when we talk about, especially with our global south issues, is the number of people we have and the diversity of how they use public space, especially open space, which doesn't have any kind of very structured use or control. This is an open space. It's open 24/7. People will throw in their trash. They will connect sewage lines because that's all that's available. That's the open space. The long-term thinking of how are those spaces managed? The government can't be doing them because they don't have the capacity. They're still putting in those overflow, which you still need. But the larger system has to have a larger thinking of connecting both. It's not one or the other. It is how do you connect the systems and how do you put them together? Because at the end of the day, each silo in terms of professional or in terms of places, until they're not connected and We're not planning for consequences. I think a lot of the time when these decisions to make a drain or to make put in a pump, it's okay, it's a solution for now, but who's going to maintain it? Who's going to manage it? Where is the planning for in the future when something changes? What is the flexibility built into the system to manage it? I think that entire system, from not just planning design, but implementation, management, monitoring, and the life cycle and enforcement, and where the government right now is even within engineering departments, they are getting drains built. They have no control over the quality of the drains being built. They are still, even though it may be say it's a perfect design, it is still not a quality because you still have the lowest bidder who's doing it. So the quality you have, the control you have to enforce is not there. So you're constantly building on a limitation of what a government can do. Whereas actually, if you take out the actual implementation, but the enforcement is possible and management monitoring through the government, there's a lot more effort that can go into experimentation and innovation in actually applying projects.
Starting with a riverfront like Sabarmati to riverfront which could be a very green, absorbing, taking into the water sensitive cities context. What's your experience and what are some of the things that you probably would like to see in future riverfront developments?
The Namami Gange assignment for good 3.5 to 4 years, where we worked on the riverfront developments across the Ganga basin. It was more of a hard kind of riverfronts, the typical engineer kind of riverfronts, and that's when we jointly discussed together with you that let's make a framework where we can look at the resilient riverfronts. So now, what are resilient riverfronts? What you are saying in the biodiversity parks, where they are amalgamating the riverfronts together, more of a greener riverfronts, the riverfronts can vary from city level to a small level to a city level, completely city planning level. So definitely there were challenges and of course depends on the greenfield and the brownfield projects as well, but yes, there is a need to shift towards the resilience, towards more of a green riverfront, like what DDA is doing. It they are making more of a biodiversity parks, connecting people with the river. In fact, the NGT didn't allow us to construct riverfront in Delhi to kind of redevelop the existing this ghat at ITO. But if you look at what we've been doing in what Kalandi Kunj is being dealt by an NMCG, we are bringing people partnership together to keeping it clean as much as possible. Visit there every week, keep it clean, and keep it as its original content, and so that when there is flood, it has the capacity to take care of that. We tried doing that greening also, and I'm sure it's in the pipeline, but making green riverfronts is more important than making them hard riverfronts. Now, what we are doing in Agartala, we are doing a Havra riverfront where we are playing with all the bamboo structures, keeping the room for the river flooding zone. Of course, any city growth, there is the reality is the slums. So shifting the encroachments, making a planned settlement for them, and making it green riverfront is what the need right now. Of course, these projects, they are not so easy. They take its own course of time in the bureaucratic system of development of a city, whether it is part of Amrut or whether it's part of the smart city mission. But yes, like when we did a study, we realized that we can really play around with the banks, make it little more greener, and keep it limited area which is hard. We were talking of a Baroni where we actually put our foot down that we will have green riverfront. So let's revise the DPR. So it takes a challenge. It's not easy to. I think sir was part of it. It's a challenge where the administrator has to take a stand. Ki no, we will do the green riverfronts. So yes, with this whole change in scenario, there is an awareness which people are aware, and now we have started working towards biodiversity, uh, keeping our riparian edges, keeping the sanctity of the city, uh, and any riverfront is all connected with the kunds. So now the shift has gone. Let's preserve our kunds. Let's preserve our heritage part of the kunds, because they're all connected together. Whether it is Puri, whether it is Ayodhya, everywhere we are trying to preserve our heritage kunds, because they're all connected. And heritage kunds can also be green kunds. It need not be, of course, there are step wells, but it can have the greener edge also.
Sure.
So I think that's where we are working together. The change will take some time, but the change is already happening.
Right.
Like we were, of course, the government norms have to be very strict. We were working in Puri for a beachfront, and where we could not lay a single PCC there, because CRZ was very stringent that we will have green. We were working with the piles of bamboo to have sustainable structures for the vendors, because the vendor is a reality at a beach.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. Manushi, you have been working with lot of water-sensitive urban design from concept to actually developing the DPRs, and some of are getting also implemented in Chennai, Kochi. So probably if you can share some of the thought that how you trying to integrate the water-sensitive city or the blue-green infrastructure into the larger developmental concept and getting it implemented.
Everybody's covered everything, so I can just piecemeal from everything that was said. I'll just start with talking about one of our projects, which is called the Integrated Stormwater Drainage Project in the Kususthalayar Basin. We were sub-consultants to Royal Haskoning DHV on the project, and this was for the Greater Chennai Corporation. Now, this project is about thousands of kilometers of stormwater drain getting laid in North Chennai for the very first time. And I think what I want to just point to is what Mr. Depender had said about a lot of the infrastructure that we are lacking, we're now constructing. And in the south, we have this opportunity to integrate it. So I think firstly, integrated infrastructure management is very key. And one of the things that we noticed while we were on this project or onboarded was that this is a grey infrastructure project that was going to cut over 400 trees. And then they were going to lay around 100 trees planted somewhere, anywhere for that matter, just to like compensate on the environmental impact that it was creating. Some of these stormwater drains were 6 meters in sizing on 3 meter wide roads. So we kind of understand the problems we are having with the way we do infrastructure planning in our cities today. And it's also very critical that we assess these situations in multi-scalar manner, which means that you must have a framework within which you should identify pilots, first test those pilots, monitor, maintain them, understand whether the blue-green infrastructure is functioning the way you have actually modeled or assessed it, and then go on to increment it. So when it comes to incremental, it's also very critical to understand that there is a huge gap in terms of capacity and resources. There is funding and mandates, and a lot of this is top down. So there is, of course, central mandates on how these things have to be done. But I'll just say an incident that I had. When I was working with the commissioner, the ex-commissioner at Greater Chennai Corporation, he was interested in exploring 150 spun city parks, which at that point we didn't even have a single DPR for it, and we were in the process of making one. And we said that why don't we begin with guidelines and capacity building and then get on to implementing at such a large scale, because we were identifying one per zone. And he said, Manshi, nobody looks at guidelines and frameworks. There's no one's going to actually refer to them. Nobody's going to follow them. So that's a fundamental problem also, because our reports just stay as reports, like was spoken here, and we need to find different methods of engagement, and it also has to come from, I think, central to state as to how these engagements happen. Like Olga kind of said, there's like a feedback mechanism every 5 years, you have to go back and update, right? I think that's so critical, because localized authorities also work in silos. There is no intergovernmental connectedness. A lot of it has been highlighted here, and there are real problems you face when, as consultants, you're working on ground on such projects. Another important idea here was the social cohesion. So one thing that we did exceptionally in this project is we really wanted to ensure that the pilot site is with community integration, and that there is awareness on the project being implemented. There is more awareness on also the programming of the project was taken through community engagement. So you're creating ownership in the process. I think a lot of these systems also fail is because we are disintegrating the citizens in the community groups from the kind of infrastructure that we're building. It's not beneficial to them anymore. It's rather causing a lot of problems. So I think just these three, I think about integrating multi-scalar and incremental, looking at intergovernmental connectedness, understanding how financing mechanisms can come with reformation, like they should have some kind of an enforcement or some kind of a structure to follow up whether the financing is actually beneficial. And I think understanding capacities and resource management at the local authority level. I think these are just the critical points that we faced.
So I'm not going into a longer follow-on discussions. Probably we don't have the time, but with that we would like to end the session. I know there are a couple of questions from the audience. Probably I would suggest audience, if you can ask directly with the panelists, that would be great, because I'm really sorry that we have exceeded the time. Thank you once again to everyone for making your time available to have this discussion, and also we are deeply honored that you are here and shared your thought. With that, I would like to end, but before ending, we would like to hand over two things to each of the panelists. So we do have books written by Sir and autographed by Sir. Yeah, it would have been a day-long discussion.